You'll guess that this workshop is going to be recorded. So I'm George McGuinness, and I've been asked to chair the proceedings today. In my day job, I lead the UK's Healthy Aging Challenge, which aims to enable people to remain active, productive, and socially connected across the generations for longer. So a strong connection to work for tomorrow, and what that means for later life. I think firstly, just let me say thank you to the ILC and the Innovation Resource Centre for HR for setting up this competition to find what should be the most exciting innovations for responding to an ageing workforce. I think this is so very timely. So after decades of talk, ageing populations are now a fact of life, and the conversation in many ways has moved from fear and doom to one of opportunity. How can we adapt and use the knowledge, skills, and capabilities that older people have acquired over their lifetime? Retirement, as our parents thought of it, is becoming a thing of the past. That was illustrated to me so clearly by Andrew Scott and Linda Grattan in their book, The 100-Year Life. They showed that someone graduating today, aiming to work until they were 65 and live to 100, would have to save in the order of 25% of their earnings from the moment they started working. So it's not just financial. In reality, people aged 65 today can look forward to many more years of life. Although it's true, there are stark differences between the most and the least advantaged. Work, or more specifically, good work, offers so much for later life, not just financial security, but as a source of a sense of purpose and of social connections, key aspects of maintaining the quality of later life. And we're now living through a period of unprecedented disruption in the world of work. That is a great environment to be in as innovators. And the 4 themes of this competition highlight how work for tomorrow can make a real difference. So just to work through those, adapting the workplace. Last year, for instance, has seen huge changes. Virtual working, even building sites have had to adapt. And my own organization is now thinking about how we move to hybrid working. Lots of scope for innovation. And living through last year, we found that new patterns of working can also help the next theme, addressing discrimination and supporting diversity. And experience tells us that, for instance, women typically arrive in later life with fewer resources than men, often as a result of having taken on responsibility for caring for others. And more generally, accumulated disadvantage from discrimination also means lost potential, which speaks to the next theme, building knowledge, skills, and competence. So what does work for tomorrow mean for those who pursued physically demanding careers? How can innovations help with life stage transitions? And then thinking, last but not least, maintaining good health. Over the last year, we've seen only too clearly the benefits of maintaining good health. And we know that poor health is a major factor in people leaving the workforce. So how can innovations help people maintain good health? And in today's workshop, we're going to be very interactive, and we want to hear all your views about the challenges and opportunities of an aging workforce and what the role for innovation is in all of this. You're going to be allocated into one of 4 breakout rooms on one of the challenge categories, where we will workshop some of the ideas and come back to the plenary to discuss the common themes and learnings. But before we get started there, I'd like to, firstly, I'm going to pass over to Lily at the ILC to share a bit more about the competition and what it's all about and what we're looking for. And we're also going to hear from Alex Hoskin, founder of Chatty Cafe Scheme and winner of the Just Group and ILC 2018-2019 Innovation for Aging Awards. And Alex is going to share a bit about her experience joining the competition and the role of innovation. So welcome, and over to you, Lily.
Thanks so much, George, and lovely to have you on board as one of our judges as well, I should say. So I was going to do a really quick presentation, and like George said, the idea really is today is to get all of your views, so not too much sort of talking from our side, but just a quick introduction of what it's all about, why a think tank is running an innovation competition, and what we're looking for within all of that. So why are we doing this? We know that we're all living longer, and that these trends are really just exacerbating. So actually the future workforce is going to look really different from what it looks like today, and all of our individual working lives are going to look very different as well. So it might be a little bit longer, it might be changing in shape. We're more likely to come in and out of work at different times, say to retrain, to take on caring responsibilities and so on. And so the workplace of the future really has to adapt to respond to these changes. We know that that's not just, there's not just a moral reason for this, there's a very clear economic one, and actually employers and governments absolutely need to sort of come on board to make the most of the potential of an aging workforce. And while as a think tank, obviously lots of our work is targeted at sort of big P policymakers, we know that employers on the ground have a huge impact, obviously, of what our day-to-day experiences of work look like. There's lots of examples from across the world where employers have played a really key role, say, in helping people stay healthy, in helping us in sort of transitions throughout life. But clearly there's much more that could happen. And that's really sort of where this competition comes in. We want to sort of platform and highlight examples of really good practice that are happening in this area, as much as encourage others who are potentially not doing as much yet to kind of see what learnings there are and how can they adapt to these changes. So the competition is an international one. We are looking across the world, also at different types of organizations, so from big employers to smaller companies. And these are sort of our 4 key challenge categories that George touched on here a little bit. I'm going to go a little into each of them. Obviously, again, this will be very top level. The idea is for our breakout rooms to kind of get into the nitty-gritty of this a little bit more. So our first category is on maintaining good health. We know that poor health is one of the key barriers really to working. It's one of the main reasons that people get shut out of the workforce early when they actually would like to keep working. So be that physical or mental health, or actually a caring responsibility for someone else. So what we're looking for here in this category really are some exciting innovations that help us, not only if we already have an existing health need to stay in the workforce, but also thinking much more holistically how we actually create workplaces that across our working lives sort of breed healthy lives as opposed to actually make us ill. Our second challenge category looks at sort of building knowledge, skills and competence. We know that if we're going to have longer and potentially changing working lives, we're going to need a whole diverse set of skills throughout those working lives. And we might not be fully trained at the beginning of our working lives all the way to the end. So how do we really make sure that there's professional development for all across our working lives? And how do we make sure that as we have an increasingly multi-generational workforce, we're actually ensuring that knowledge transfer doesn't sort of stay in silos, but we're actually really thinking about how we transfer those knowledges, those skills between generations. So, you know, we're looking for ideas around how we ensure professional development for all and overcome some barriers to that as well. You know, this is also thinking about questions around lifelong learning. How do we really sort of retain that organizational knowledge and facilitate knowledge transfer? Our third category is a very big one, looking at how we address discrimination. Again, a very big barrier to either staying in work or finding new work is ageism. We know, for example, that during the pandemic, older workers have been particularly hard hit by redundancies or being put on furlough schemes, for example. And we know that it's really hard if you have been made redundant to find a new job, and that actually it's a lot harder than for younger workers. We also know that, you know, while there's a lot of sort of ageism at the entry level of getting into a new job, it doesn't sort of end there. So in a job, you're less likely to receive training as an older worker, but you're also less likely to accept training opportunities. So there's sort of big biases that we need to combat, both on the side of employers themselves, as well as sort of our own internal biases. So, you know, how do we get better at actually combating this bias, bringing it out? How do we assemble diverse perspectives? Because we know obviously that ageism only sort of intersects with other forms of diversity as well. And if we look to the future, we kind of need to make sure that our workplaces are increasingly inclusive to make the most of these sort of more diverse workforces. The final category is very broad as well, and clearly there's some overlap here with some of the previous ones, but it's looking at how we sort of adapt the workplace for increasing flexibility. And, you know, as George mentioned as well, flexible working has been around, or at least as a word, for a really long time. The reality is, though, that actually, you know, lots of us haven't been able to make the most of that offer really for very long. Potentially COVID is a sort of accelerator in this place. We've realized that, whether we're dialing in from our living rooms as I am today, or our studies or our bedrooms, actually we're not going to sort of bunk off. Actually, we can stay productive and engaged and work in teams and so on. So, potentially we can see how sort of employers work sort of building on from that to actually really deliver and increase the offer of flexible working. And it's increasingly about sort of supporting people to do those multiple transitions that we're going to have. So potentially coming in and out of parental leave, allowing for care in any shape or form, offering that greater flexibility. And then at the end of our working lives as well, thinking about how we sort of phase into retirement and not face a cliff edge sort of one day working full time and then going straight into full-time retirement. So that was a really quick, I should say, very, very top level whistle-stop tour of some of the sort of categories we're looking at. Obviously, you will be going into breakout rooms shortly to sort of bring a bit more flesh to those bones and think more, realistically about what that means for different kinds of organisations. So, we are open for submissions until the 1st of September. In this little timeline we're currently here. We are planning a sort of Q&A drop-in for anyone who's got questions about how to apply in August. And then in the autumn, we'll be reviewing submissions. We're hoping that in some shape or form, partly physical at least, we will have an award ceremony early in the new year. So if you have a bright idea, so either something that you're already doing or actually a budding idea that's sort of just about ready to be implemented, absolutely do apply. We have an application pack on our website as well with a bit more detail. If you have an idea but you're not quite sure if it's right, or you just want to sort of run some ideas through, absolutely do get in touch with me as well, and I'm sure that email will be in thank you emails afterwards as well. So again, this is all in the application pack, but what are we looking for? We want solutions that really address a need and that sort of tackle these issues head on. We want solutions that are original, that have potential for impact, that are well designed and implemented, and that essentially are scalable and applicable to other contexts as well. Here are some of our judges, some of which are on the call today, so you're likely to meet one or two of them in our breakout rooms. They will be reviewing submissions as they come in. So thanks again to everyone on our judging panel for offering your expertise and helping us with this exciting project. And again, I won't go into too much of this, but why apply? And obviously, like I mentioned, we're not the typical organisation to run an innovations competition, but I think what we're really keen to do is really work with our shortlist, with our finalists, with our winner, and get them in front of sort of both policymakers and some employers, but also potential investors. I actually worked on our Innovating for Ageing Awards as well, where Alex won, who'll be telling us a little bit more shortly. And I think what worked really well is kind of us working quite closely with solutions, seeing what works for them, be that some targeted PR support, connecting someone to a mentor, and potentially even, linking someone up with someone who could pilot a solution. So we're really excited to be working with people together, making the connections. And yeah, absolutely get in touch. So whether you want to apply, whether you know someone you think we should be getting in touch with who's got a really good idea, or actually if you'd like to contribute to our blog or video series that's kind of looking into some of the challenges and opportunities that we'll be running through today. So thanks, and I'll pass back over to George.
So without a break, let's go straight to Alex to hear about your experience in a previous competition. Alex.
Hi, can you see me?
Yes.
Yeah, oh, brilliant. Right, sorry, I can only see the slide on the front. Hi, everyone. So my name's Alex Hoskin. In 2019, I was fortunate to win the Innovating for Ageing Award. I think my memories of the award process were that it was quite a simple process. I think if you apply for funding and do other kind of things, they can be really, really complicated. And I seem to remember it was quite a simple process, and the people that you needed to speak to, like Lily, were always accessible. And the whole process was really exciting, to be honest. It was obviously nerve-wracking, but it was really interesting, and I felt like I kind of learned a lot from it. And then obviously winning it, getting the £7,500 was fantastic. It kind of just was put in my bank account quite quickly, which was amazing. And then I also got some support from the Just group, which was again really, really invaluable. And I went and met with them and got some really, really interesting kind of PR support. Really top level as well, kind of what you would imagine you would pay a lot of money to get, you know, not something that I would have been able to kind of get myself. And they were really, really helpful, and actually they've continued to be helpful in the last couple of years. So I've gone to them with kind of press releases, and they've given me some good contacts, and they've just been a really good kind of link. But really winning the competition for the Chatty Cafe scheme, it actually did so much for us. And as I've been thinking about it, it actually completely changed everything, because at the time that I applied for the competition, I was kind of doing the scheme around my young son and around work. And what winning that money meant was that I could actually employ someone to part-time to run the scheme. And that person really had a kind of different set of skills to me, and was able to kind of formalize it, get everything we needed in place, link us up with government agencies, and really just kind of elevate the whole thing. And since then, we've now got 2 full-time employees, and it's just kind of gone from strength to strength, really. And when I kind of reflect on it, I do feel that this competition was 100% the catalyst for that. Obviously, with a lot of hard work and dedication, but I do think that money, you know, really elevated it and meant I could take it to the next level, which I wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. And I was at a real crossroads at that point, because I kind of wasn't really making money off the scheme and needed to do a day job. So this just kind of did really change things for me. And I would say to anyone that's thinking of applying, you know, like Lily said, get in contact with her and just run it past her and see, you know, give it a shot, really, because you just don't know, do you? You've got to be in it to win it, as they say. But yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else, Lily, that you want me to mention.
Do you mind if I quickly jump in? It's really good to hear, Alex. And actually, I was wondering if you wouldn't mind just doing a really quick sort of run through for anyone who doesn't know what, you know, the Chatty Cafe scheme is.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, it's a little different to what we're looking for here, and it tackles a different issue. But you know, you absolutely won the hearts of judges at the Innovating Paging Awards. So it'd be lovely to hear.
Oh yeah, sorry, I should have mentioned that. So I started the Chatty Cafe scheme in 2017, following the birth of my now 5-year-old son. And a bit like you said before, Lily, I had that experience of kind of being in one world and then you kind of falling off a cliff edge into another world. So, you know, gone from like working and studying to being at home with a baby, which, although it was absolutely, you know, I was very, very blessed, and, you know, and I knew I was lucky, and I loved him to pieces, but also it was a massive kind of change for me personally, going from that kind of busyness to almost like periods of kind of being quite isolated, really. And I kind of spent a lot of time in the town centre, pushing the pram around, going into cafes and shops. And it really struck me that you could be out of the house a lot, but not have much interaction with other people. And sometimes your kind of main interactions were really with shopkeepers, people working in cafes. And it struck me that if I felt like that, then there must be a lot of other people feeling the same. And on one of the occasions I was out in a cafe, I just kind of people watching, as you do. There was an elderly lady on her own, and she did look really fed up. You know, obviously not everybody looks fed up on their own. I love going to cafes on my own lots of times, but this lady just looked really down. And on another table, there was a youngish man with additional needs, and who looked to be a carer. And they were kind of sat just looking around the room, not really having any conversation with each other. And then I was sat on a table with my little baby, kind of thinking, oh, feeling just a bit isolated. And I just thought all of us look quite down in the dumps, really, but I wasn't quite sure how to approach them. So that kind of got me thinking about the possibility of cafes and venues having a table where customers could sit if they were happy to talk to other customers. So that was kind of my initial idea for the scheme and how it began. And that kind of had gone well, and we've partnered up with Costa Coffee, which was brilliant. But then when COVID hit, obviously, like everyone else, we've had to adapt and kind of change really what we're doing. So we've still got the cafes and other venues in the background for when we're allowed to kind of start that again. But since last March, we've actually also started doing weekly phone calls for people. And we've now got, I think we've got about 160 volunteers ringing around 200 people every single week for up to 30 minutes of just a chat about anything. And there's no time frame on that. Like there's no time, it's not going to stop. As long as the volunteers are willing to do it. And we're doing some Zoom calls as well, which are going brilliantly. So yeah, so that's kind of us in a nutshell. Is that all right?
Alex, maybe if I can come in. I think you hide your light under a bushel a little bit. You had some recognition recently, didn't you?
Yes, I did actually.
So tell us just what was that?
I've now got an OBE, which was incredible. It's a strange thing to drop into conversation, you know. But yeah, so that was brilliant.
So in what is it, sort of 4 years from an idea sat in a cafe just thinking where you're going to a big social movement across currently the UK. So very well done. Many congratulations.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Good. Well, so we should move on to the next stage, which is moving into breakout rooms. Lily, are you going to, are they pre-assigned? I just didn't get this bit in my brief, but we have a series of breakout rooms and we'll go out, we'll be back together for feedback at 3:30 and breakout room per theme. So Lily, do you want to sort of take over and just do the administration?
Yeah, sure. So when registering, you would have all put in some preferences. We've tried as much as possible to sort of stick to those, but you might find yourself in a slightly different breakout room. Hopefully you can bring up some overlapping themes. Yeah, so the breakout rooms will be open shortly. You'll each be assigned to one. We've got some wonderful facilitators and people bringing in some ideas through some pitches that will start off the discussion, and really want to hear everyone's views. So do turn your cameras on, raise your hands when you want to come in, and I think that's it.
The pleasure of one of these strange experiences of dropping into conversations as they go on, find some remarkable parallels between them all. So let's not spending more time and sort of hand over to the facilitators to sort of feedback for a couple of minutes on each of those. And maybe if I could start by asking David Blane, Professor David Blane, to talk about the health breakout.
I would be happy to do so, but I think Aaron is going to do it.
Ooh, go for it then.
Yeah, so that I wrote a lot of notes, so I'll just pick a couple here. Really great discussion. We, obviously we were talking about the role of workplace and supporting health, and it, as you would expect, moved on to sort of the larger discussion around how can we support people to be healthier. Some of the key themes around here was nudging employees to keep active, whether that's making it more difficult for individuals to grab a glass of water, go to the printer, have their car parked further away. All of these little things can actually incentivize individuals to keep healthier. Another point that was raised around active travel. So for example, cycle schemes, which are really well known, but how else can we actually support or incentivize people to keep more active going to and from work? So removing that reliance on the car is a really great way in kind of supporting individuals during their working day. There was a bit of discussion around how can we get workplaces to recognize the role that they could be having in promoting health. So, can there be some sort of toolkit that can demonstrate to workplaces or employers sort of the very simple but effective interventions that they could implement that could have a great benefit on keeping active. And there was a bit of discussion around things like having standing desks and walking meetings, that these things can all play a role. And Vybarr actually came up with a really interesting idea. I hope it's okay if I mention it to the rest of the group, but essentially he suggested an idea of developing a chair that over the course of maybe 20-30 minutes becomes more increasingly uncomfortable, so it encourages someone to get up and actually be active. A really great innovative idea that I think would definitely incentivize people to keep active. And then we talked a little bit about who do we need to influence, and one of our attendees mentioned that we need to really sort of build relationships between researchers and entrepreneurs to make workplace initiatives happen and more sustainable. Entrepreneurs have these great ideas, but they may not have the research to back it up. So, kind of bridging these gaps can really help drive forward some solutions, and sort of thinking about how we can implement these initiatives, starting local, starting in a small space and testing it out in a specific location, and then sort of building on from there is a great way to kind of actually test how well these interventions might work. So I might just stop there because there was a lot more, but hope that was comprehensive enough.
Aaron, fascinating, and probably good then to sort of move on. David, I don't know who was going to feedback from the skills group.
I can give a go, and maybe Patrick can sort of jump in. I'll be very brief. We talked about how the world of work is going to change. Essentially, we're going, we expect our workforce to be older. We expect ourselves to be doing slightly different jobs. We expect new sorts of work and new forms of contracts. So the gig economy having potentially a greater role, and that we recognise that COVID's actually like to be such a significant disruptor. So point one is the world of work is absolutely going to change. The second issue was then look actually what this raises is huge amounts of issues which were bigger than which actually were there before, but may well need to but are likely to be more significant going forward. And that's everything from the real detail of the design of employment contracts and the way we do employment contracts will need to change, through to how do we support intergenerational learning from both younger to older as well as older to younger, but also the recognition of an older workforce. How do we support all ages to know and understand both the issues around care, informal care as well as formal care. We had lots of sort of I suppose concerns around sort of or questions around whether there was specific support or enough support from government and indeed employers around supporting older workers. So there was a conversation about actually how the Kickstart scheme mainly supports 18 to 24-year-olds, and actually I mentioned that the government's new bill around lifelong learning fundamentally is around supporting people who've never had the opportunity to learn, whereas maybe we need to do a bit more around within that, around how you upskill. And then lots of ideas, whether they be around how we make the most of collective intelligence, how we have, should we have upskilling programs, ideas from Unilever about how they're redesigning their contracts. So lots and lots of issues and ideas, and I hope that some of them may well come to fruition through people submitting them formally to us and us trying to develop them a bit more.
And then, did anyone else want to come in from that group on that? Or I think so far from Aaron and David, lots of ideas around where the scope for innovation is. Clearly, COVID, and I think I heard COVID come through as a strong theme in all four. So we'll hear a little bit more going forward. So some really good ideas about where innovators could do. One bit that I also picked up from some of the conversations that hasn't come out quite so strongly so far is when we talk about employment, how difficult it is for smaller employers to address some of these things versus thinking about these as a corporate. So we might sort of pick that up as we go on to think about or hear from the diversity breakout. So Brian, I don't know who's going to sort of feedback from your group.
Yeah, I'm going to do my best. I'm having an issue accessing the PowerPoint where we had all the notes, but I've got some written down, and I'm sure that my group members can join in as appropriate. You know, I started by talking about how these four areas that everyone was broken, you know, that established these priority challenges and the breakout groups were extended from the workability model, which is this piece of this sort of framework that comes from, I think, originated in Finnish occupational health research, but talks about 4 stages of a house and how these lead to each other. And there's, you know, you can go up and down, but you know, you've got to have your foundation to build up to, you know, a situation where everyone fits really well. This third level that we've associated here with discrimination and diversity is one that relates to concepts of, you know, motivation and confidence, and taps into broader questions of sort of workplace culture. And I think that's something that really arose in our conversations. We heard perspectives around how the language that's used in job ads plays a role here. And an interesting point there is that if you have language that appeals to older applicants or older workers, it doesn't turn off younger people. So, you know, it again strengthens this message that sort of age inclusive is beneficial for all. We discussed the important overlap that exists between ageism and ableism. This is something that ILC published work on just last month, and it taps into the broader questions around how these misperceptions generally can be internalized by people themselves, and therefore that's when you get these situations where older workers don't think that they should need any training, or they don't go after opportunities, or they don't feel confident within their workplace to assert themselves because they've got these internalized attitudes. But most of the stuff that, you know, that we need, I think, to address discrimination and diversity in the workplace, the truth of the matter is, whether it's targeted to address the question of ageism, this is going to be beneficial for all. And there's plenty of evidence already that having diverse workplaces, having inclusive workplaces, generate benefits for businesses. So one of the challenges that we identified is just this role that there seems to be so much knowledge out there, and yet those who need to implement the right kinds of policies or take the right kinds of actions always seem to still need to be convinced. So there's still work to do in that. We talked about how there are these employer resource groups, at least going to your point, George, around big employers, and those seem to be very good for enhancing opportunities, for addressing issues of diversity and inclusion. An important point here, and I think I will stop on this and let anyone else come in who needs to, is really that whatever thing might be implemented to address diversity and address discrimination in the workplace is really going to relate to the broader workplace culture. This is about facilitating inclusive workplace culture, and that in itself is going to be an ongoing project. It's not something that has a start and an end time. And so more engagement across this theme will be better for businesses to improve their inclusivity, but it can also foster that employee engagement and that sense of belonging amongst workers of all ages. And again, that's just going to benefit everyone.
Interesting sort of conversation. I think the whole theme about ageism and the case for age diversity and age inclusion, if you like, came out quite a lot in the other groups as well. But also came out of the context that sometimes the diversity focus actually shifts into very specific aspects of diversity, and then to the exclusion of the full range of it. So I think really interesting points coming out from your group. What it did, I mean, Paul Springer in the skills group actually sort of came up at the end, and this is a tip for people who are thinking of applying. One, he was really keen on people avoiding reinvention on that. But I think the more pertinent point of the two that he made for your group is don't assume that you're fixing older people's problems for them. Do engage and understand what they are, rather than assume you understand what the problem is and head off as innovation. So some tips there for our innovators as you're thinking of applying. So finally, flexibility, which I kicked off thinking that actually the world of COVID has opened up a new range of possibilities because we've been forced into all sorts of flexible working. Mehbs, I don't know if it's going to be you or one of your team who will feed back on your conversation.
Well, I'll get us started, and I'm sure I'll miss something which others will pitch in on. But we had a very, very stimulating conversation. And it's amazing how a little virus has changed the world in 18 months in ways that we never thought was possible. Governments couldn't do it, policymakers couldn't do it. We as a global population couldn't do it, but a little virus was able to do it. And so there was an interesting theme brought up by Kerry from LG that, we've gone from working at the desk to working on desktops. And I think that was a nice sort of summary of how the work life has changed. And the second key point that was made, which was really key, was the impact of this change in work environment that is had on our own families, on the educational system, on the care for the elderly, and so many other societies have been impacted because of this change in work. And I think many of our team members concluded that I think the new normal will be very different than the old normal, and that the idea of going, spending 4 hours on the train to go to work 5 days a week may be a thing of the past, although we don't know that for sure. And the other interesting thing that was mentioned is that when KPIs are being measured, and these are early days, actually the KPIs are not only being met, but they're being exceeded to this new work environment, which is really encouraging. And again, early days, more data needs to come through, because we really don't know what the long-term impact on this change is likely to be. And I think we talked about other areas that affect work, and the challenges that we're facing, and we kind of concluded that despite the facts and figures, although one of our team members said that actually there's not enough data, facts and figures, we need to actually create more. I asked, where's the inertia then? And I know in the UK, you guys are far ahead than we are in North America and other parts of the world in terms of trying things. Your Unilever examples, your midlife MOT examples are all UK based. And I applaud you for all that innovation you're doing. And I think the key point that was brought up, which I think is really significant, is that it's a question of priorities among the corporate world. I think the George Floyd incident, the virus, has really rejigged the whole world. And ageism and the issue of ageism was coming to be on the radar in many countries, and we've kind of been now thrown to the next level of priorities. But I think there's lots of optimism moving forward. And when we talked about the menopause area and how women are being kind of integrated in the workforce now that more women are in there, working longer and healthier, it was more of an awareness, and how do we get the HR departments to start talking about it? And I think there are lots of groups that are coming up, and Yvonne mentioned the menopause group that is it's a coffee chat, and people come, men and women, which I was really impressed by, to listen. And it's amazing the personal stories that are being shared. which you normally would not hear because they're all kind of behind the bedroom door stories. So we had a wonderful session, and team, please pitch in if I missed anything of significance here.
Thing that's very important structurally is that we've moved from a defined benefit pension scheme world to a defined contribution pension scheme world, which has a lot of influence on employers changing attitudes towards the workforce, and how that can indirectly change employers' attitudes to working for tomorrow in terms of being more innovative in terms of the kind of policies that they can adapt, as we've been discussing in all these sort of reporting sessions so far. Because that's a structural change, and also structure and dealing with structural technological change, and how you dovetail that with how we adapt work practices for work for tomorrow, if you want. That's it.
And I think, Tony, that's a really sort of good sort of introduction to one of the big challenges. And I think one of the things that's changed in some of the narrative around aging in the last year is that where in my role, it had been very easy to make the case for employment in later life and better employment. It brought into sharp focus, actually, the generation just leaving university or just leaving school are looking at no employment for the time being, or very different circumstances. You know, and I feel that as a parent as well, seeing that young. So just sort of throw open. So we've talked about ageism earlier on in this. The importance of actually having an intergenerational perspective in any innovations that come forward in the world of work for tomorrow. And just, does anyone sort of want to comment on that?
I think it's really important. We're running a pilot at the moment in Mercer around knowledge transfer. And the way we've structured it is that we want at least 3 generations to be part of a formalized knowledge transfer process, so that we're getting all 3 perspectives. I mean, usually we hear from the millennials and the boomers, but actually everybody misses out, the generation X in the middle, and the Z coming through as well. So we firmly believe that to be fully inclusive, it has to include all generations, and sometimes you have to formalize the way that happens.
That's great sort of comments. Anyone else want to sort of comment on that for the benefit of our innovators?
No, perhaps just make a slightly different point, George, is that David. So I think that's really, really important. I think I gave a couple of examples in the session I was in around how actually employers are really trying to start to do this. I suppose, you know, clearly one of the things we're trying to do with this competition is recognise that, you know, the world is changing, the world of work is changing, where we have an ageing workforce. We need to make sure it works for, but we need to make sure work works for older and younger. I guess, you know, in a sort of slightly troublemaker sort of way. I think there's a really interesting question about, and you know, one of the things that I get really, really interested and excited by, and I have by some of the ideas from today, is something around sort of challenging groupthink in this space. And yeah, Paul in our session was very strong on, look, we need to listen to and engage older people, not do things for them. And I think that's the same for younger people. But that sort of slightly rambling intro brings me to sort of an area I've always been very sort of interested in, which is the role of, and Vybarr's clearly very interested in this, the role of work in relation to keeping us healthy. And clearly one of the risks and challenges here is that, frankly, you know, many of us are a little bit lazy and we don't really want to be having to do physical activity, and we don't really want to be forced into a bit of activity in work. And I think my sense is that one of the really negative things that has happened as a result of an aging workforce is the solution that many companies have come up with is, let's redesign the production line so you haven't got to use any physical activity. Let's put the lift in instead of the stairs. Let's move the water and the canteen right next so people haven't got to walk very far. And I think there's a really interesting sort of potential innovation, set of innovations around actually how we think about how workplaces can better keep us healthier throughout our whole lives. And actually that might be really unpopular. There's sort of, you know, we are actually killing with kindness by basically taking all physical activity out of work. And we know that the world of working from home potentially makes it even worse, because actually we do slightly fewer steps working from home because the main activity most people do is active travel to and from work. So that, you know, one of the things that really interests me was someone who's sort of challenging some of the norms of, oh, we've got older people, we just need to make the work a bit easy for them. And I think sometimes we need to be thinking a bit about actually how we really think about what the needs as well as the wants of future generations of workers are. So a bit rambling, but I think there's something for me in turning the conversation around a bit and making sure that we have innovations that aren't just about, you know, adapting workplaces to and result in actually, you know, worse outcomes.
David, can I raise a point there? Because it reminded me of another theme that I raised in our little group, and that was the role of trade unions and whether we could encourage the TUC to get involved in this competition, and maybe one or two of the unions could make it a submission because they might have very good ideas, and it, you know, building upon some of the things that you've just said.
It'd be great if we I think there's a big role for, you know, and where you see, you know, the where we've seen the biggest changes, I think, over the last 20 years in terms of positive changes around both employability and employment rates of older workers tend to be where you have a really strong tripartite policy environment of employers, individuals, government, work and trade, for where you have employers, individuals, trade unions, Scandinavia, in the Netherlands compared to Belgium, and it's all down to actually really engaging people like trade unions as well as employers together, and that, sadly, I don't think we have that in the UK at the moment.
But I think, I say, within the TUC there are people that I know personally who, you know, one can engage with, and it's in their interest, because if the trade unions want to continue their membership, they've got to think about the way work is changing so that they can continue to recruit and help their fellow, you know, help their members, if you understand what I mean.
And I think that's great, and it picks up on this piece of poor health is the main reason why a lot of people fall out of employment prematurely.
Yes.
I'm going to sort of just mindful of the clock, sort of just wind up a little bit. But I think that last conversation talked a little bit about nudge. And some of the other sort of feedbacks and conversations I heard sort of raised the important role of government in this. And one of the things I'd sort of say to innovators is that generally government doesn't nudge, it shoves. And I think the space for innovators is actually to get in before that. And you know, the inspiring example of Alex and her cafes, chatty cafes, is a really good example of think about how you could bring your innovation into being and demonstrate its value, and then you'll get the shove from government or from trade unions or whoever to actually try and get that to scale. So we've had a really impressive set of conversations, and thank you particularly to all our speakers, facilitators, and especially for all of you for contributing. Firstly, or before I finish, just a word from our sponsors. So the ILC has just launched ticket sales for their 7th annual Future of Aging conference on the 2nd of December. And this year's theme is on diversity and how we can make aging work for everyone. So find out more on their website. They also have a series of upcoming events. So Under the Microscope, comparing countries' experience of COVID-19 on Thursday next week, the 1st of July. A webinar on data, bots and drones, transforming access to health through technology on the 6th of July. And if I could speak fast, so COVID-19 in the UK and US, understanding the impact on insurance, retirement income and other financial services on the 15th. And so for all of that news, you can find that on their website. So back to the topic of the day. Please do visit the ILC's website for details of the competition and your submissions. And from me, thanks to the team behind all this for getting all the arrangements in place. Really excellent afternoon, well done. And again, thank you to everyone for contributing.